Hello everyone, welcome. By the end of this video, we are gonna be able to navigate from home in this Climber website to shop, where we will be making API calls to retrieve these images with the titles, and they will have a link to go to that items details page. And in that details page, we will have the ability to go back to our shop. Both of those pages will be using the useEffect hook from React, and the layout that we are seeing here with these images is going to be done with the grid system. So in this video, we are going to see a little review about React Router DOM to be able to navigate to that details page, React hooks with useEffect, API calls, and the use of the grid system. This video is the third video in a series of 3. Nevertheless, if you just landed on this video, you can still follow along because I'm gonna leave links in the description of this video pointing to the code of the first video, the code for the second video, and if you want to actively follow along, you can just go to that second Codesandbox link in the description of this video and you will be at the starting point of this video, in case you need the reference to the final code. Just to show the current state of the app that we have, I'm gonna go to this other tab that I have open. We have home selected by default, and if I go to shop, we only display the word shop. If I go to blog, we display the word blog. We're not gonna be touching blog, but if I go to shop, this is the initial state that we have. So let's go straight to the code. And in order to have more space so you guys can see the code, I'm gonna close the preview window and make the code larger. What would be important to quickly review so that we can start? The index.js file. If I go to index.js file, I have here selected our React Router DOM components, and we have the switch component set so that depending on the route or location of the browser, we go to a specific place. Home is at root and shop is at /shop. And when the location is at /shop, we are rendering an inline component that just says shop. And that should be enough for a quick review. The only other thing worth noting is that if you were to start an application, a create React app application, the only 2 packages that you would have to install that we installed in this project are React Router DOM and Material UI styles, which we're using to have CSS in JS. To create the grid layout, we're gonna have to add some styles to the shop component. And to do that, I'm gonna start by creating a new file, a shop.styles.js file. And I'm gonna quickly type the boilerplate for this file because we have done this before. So I'm gonna import the make styles function from @material UI styles. Then we're gonna export default make styles, which is that function that we will be running and passing an object. And the first property of this object is gonna be shop root. Before I start typing some styles without showing you guys how or why, I'm gonna go to the console and I will click this inspector icon to go to the list item. And here we have our UL or unordered list. And the UL is what we want to be a grid. So once I have that selected, I want to go and start adding the styles because this UL is a container and is what should be the grid. So this UL, I want it to be display grid. And if I hover over the UL now, we can see that it is displaying as a grid. We can see the lines there. I cannot show you with the mouse because it will disappear. And by default, this grid is 1 column. So that's why all the list items are one before the other. I can continue typing here and say columns. And I want the grid template columns. And I'm gonna first add 1 column. And like that, we would have the same behavior because it's just 1 column, the default. And now I'm gonna try adding a second column and we see how that now changes to what we want, 2 columns, 1 next to each other. When we have repeated column sizes, instead of saying 1 fragment, we can remove that and use the repeat function and say we want 2 columns that are gonna be 1 fraction each. This is all good, but in reality, if I go to the sign and I click one of the images, that's not the size that our grid is. You might not be able to see this, but the width here is 528 pixels for the image. So that's the size of our column that we really want. I'm gonna change that size. So instead of our columns being from all the way to the left to the center and then to the center all the way to the right, we just want that size. I'll go to the 1 fraction and say that I want 528 pixels. And that changes things a little bit for us because now the columns are all the way to the left. And if you can notice on the right, the image is actually getting outside of the grid. So there's several things that we want to fix here. I'm gonna try to go fast over them because I would imagine that most of you are not here for the styles, more for like the React part of things. What I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna copy the styles that I just did and take them to our file and paste them there. Of course, I need to fix this really quick. And now that we have that in place, we can continue. One important thing to do is that the images shouldn't be going outside of our grid. So our image right now, we see it's going out and all of the other ones are doing the same thing. So I'm gonna do this image and I'm gonna try and see what's going on here. I think we should just say that the width should be 100% of the container. So that way it is as wide as the column from the grid. And the height, well, I know from the design that the height is 352 pixels. And things are already starting to look better. Let's move those styles too. But in this case is a bit more specific. This is our chop root, but the list item is not at the root, is a child, or all the list items are children of the root. So we have to say that we're gonna target the root and then a children list item, and that's where we want these styles. Another thing that I just realized, and maybe you realized it before me, is that we declared this file of styles and we have been changing the styles and it seems like everything is in place, but in reality we didn't use these styles in chop.js, so we actually have to do that. This is just because Codesandbox is not refreshing the changes, but if we were to be running this locally, nothing would be happening. We wouldn't be seeing those styles. So let's just go to the top to make that import. And this is another one of those nice hooks. So import use styles from chop styles, and right before the useState hook, we're gonna add this one. I want to say const classes equals use styles. Now I'm gonna go to my UL where I should be using those styles to say class name, and I'll use a classes.choproot. And now we're back on track. Let's go back to chop.styles. Another of the styles that we need is to justify the content. Let me do that and I'll explain what that is. And we want it to be centered. And we also want a column gap of 50 pixels. And the 50 pixels, again, is something that I know from the designs. But so if I inspect the UL and I go to those styles that I added, justify content center, if I remove that, the content goes to the left. So we want it centered. We could be to the right or to the left, center. And the column gap, if I remove that one, it's exactly that, the gap between the columns. And I know that I want 50 pixels. One small detail that I want to remove from this is the bullet that we see here. And we have a bullet because these are list items from a list, and that is what we would get. If I go down here to the user agent styles for UL, we see the list type is disk. So let me quickly go to our list item and say that the list type should be none. And actually that didn't work. Let's see. Well, list type is not list type actually. It's list style. List style. And there we go. And I just realized that there's another mistake that I did. So the image is going all the way from here to down there. And that's because when I was saying width 100%. We were talking about the images and the height as well, but instead of that, I put it to the list item. So it should be on the image. So inside of the list item, we want to target the image, and we can do the same thing. We say the root, which is list item, the image tag, and that's what we are targeting. And I can just grab the styles and move them downwards. And now it looks way better. It was looking like this before because the styles were here in the console, but when the page refreshed, then it was wrong. Let's move away from styles for a moment and go back to some JSX because it's way more interesting. Here we just have the list item that is rendering an image, but we also want this text and the link. Let's do that. After the image, I'm gonna add a P for paragraph, and I'm gonna close that P. And inside what we want, we know some of the properties of the product, so I will say product. And we know that the product comes with a title, and that is what we will display there. And then since we are using React Router DOM, we can do the link with the link component, or we could do it with history and say history.push. In this case, we're gonna do it with link, the link component from React Router DOM. So let's first go all the way to the top to import that component, because if not, Codesandbox might freeze. And I will say import the link component from React Router DOM. Let's go back down there after our paragraph, and I'll say that we want that link component. And that link component is gonna say learn more. So learn more about the specific product that you are seeing in that link. And this link has to point to somewhere so that we can transition. So the link component from React Router DOM has a property that is to. Where are we linking to? And right now, if we go quickly to the index.js file, we know that we are at the path shop, and we want this to go to shop slash some ID of the product. So let's add that. We're gonna say that this is a templating string, and when we click the link, we're gonna go to shop slash, and then we need interpolation, and we are going to that product ID. Let's see how that looks. And this is nice. It already has a nice form here. We have the image, then the title is this fake text. And if I hover over the link, we see over the left lower corner that this would go to /shop/1. Maybe that text is too small to see on the video. But right now, if I click this link, let's do that. You know, the URL changes, but it's going nowhere because we don't have a route for that. We just have shop, but we don't have shop/1 in this case. So let's continue doing some React Router DOM things. We will have to go to index.js, and we already have our switch that goes to the different routes. So let's just get here to the shop route, and I am gonna duplicate this with Shift Option down. And from the path, I'm just gonna change the path to have an item ID. So I'm passing semicolons. That means that this is a parameter, and this is the name of the parameter. So when I am in that route and that component, I can say match.params.itemID. I can call this dog if I wanted, and it's parameters.dog, but that's not right. So item ID. And the other thing that we have to add is that we don't want to go to shop again. We want to go to the item details component, which we don't have, but I don't want to change it right now because I know how Codesandbox behaves. So we will have to go to the components folder and add that component. Now I'm going to add a folder. I'm going to call it item details. And then on item details, I'm going to create a file called item details.js. And I'm not going to show this right now, but maybe in a future video. There's something called plop.js that lets you generate these things for you, and it saves you so much time. So maybe in another video I'll start with that, and then we can just create all of our components with plop. Boilerplate creation, import React from React const item details equals an arrow function that returns a React fragment IM details export default item details. Now let's go to item.js and import the item details. So import item details from components, item details. And like I mentioned before, you can avoid this double item details like we did with shop if you had an index.js file like this one. But let's continue. So instead of shop in this second one, I will say item details. And now let's try how that works. If I am on my page and I go to learn more from a particular item or product, it didn't work. And if you have seen my videos, you most likely know already why. If you haven't been watching these videos, consider subscribing. The reason why is that this path is, of course, very similar to this one. And the location first matches this path because we're saying something like this. We are at shop 1. And when we are at our routes, we say, does our location include /shop? And it does include /shop. The second one also includes /shop, but the first one goes first. So to avoid that, we have to do what we did in this first one and specify the exact property. So let's say exact. And now let's try that once again. And we already see the IM details. So let's go to all the way. I'm at home, I go to shop, I see my products, I go to learn more for the product 1, and I see the details for that product. And now that we arrived at the details page, we are trapped because there's no way we can go back. We can go back to home and then click shop again, but of course that's not ideal. So let's take care of that with React DOM again. I will go to my item details file. We are gonna import link one more time from React router DOM. And after IM details, I am gonna use that link. I'm gonna open link, close link, and just say back to shop. It jumped because I saved the file. And again, like we said before, we need this link to point to somewhere. So to, and it should be going back to shop. Now we see the back to shop link. And if I click that, we are back at shop. One thing I want to show before we continue, if I go to that item and I am details, but I mentioned that if we specified item ID, I can go to that item details and say match.props. So let's pull out match from here to prove that point. And instead of IM details, I'm going to say IM details, and then I'm going to say that ID. So IM details and then match. I said props, but it's a parameters dot item ID. Now if we go to the app, we see IM details 1. Let's go back to shop. Let's click the second one, IM details 2. And that only shows that we have access to the parameters that we pass in that route. And let's not leave all the styles for this grid to the end. This kind of looks funky. We see the style, there's some padding here, and the link looks a bit different. It doesn't have the underline and it's blue. And let's not leave the styles for this grid to the end. Let's just prettify this a little bit. There should be some padding here. This link shouldn't be underlined and shouldn't be purple. It should be blue, kind of like that. Not gonna go all the way to look exactly like that, but just enough so that you guys have that reference. So I'm gonna go to shop.styles, see what's missing. And inside that list item, we have the image like we mentioned before, but we also have that paragraph. So let's target that paragraph as well. I'm just gonna add a little bit of margin, and I'll say .5 rem. Now I want you to notice one thing that I'm doing here that it's not quite right or correct, and is that I am mixing pixels, and now I am saying rems here. It should all be the same thing, either pixels or rems, but rems are recommended because of accessibilities. So if the user decides to change the size of the font of the browser, then everything will move with the rems and not with the pixels. But that kind of thing is also for another video. Let's continue here. I'm just gonna add, so we have the image, we have the paragraph, and also we have the link, because the React Router DOM link behind the scenes renders an anchor. And I'm gonna remove the underline with text decoration, be none. And I wanna change the color to the color that I picked, which I'm just gonna quickly grab from my design. This is the learn more link that we are talking about. I'm gonna copy this hex code, copy paste there. And we see that we have a little bit more space in the paragraph, and then we have the link in the color that we specified without the underline, but we still have or need some space here in the item or the column row. So let's go back and fix that really quick. That would be the last property that I'm gonna take care of. And this property is called grid auto rows. And I want the full size of my rows to be 487 pixels. And let's go to the page, and that looks way better. A super quick explanation about that property: grid auto columns. Why auto? In grid template columns, so this guy's column 1, column 2, we are specifying that we want 2 of those. But nowhere are we specifying how many rows we want, because we're receiving an array from an API and we don't know how many items it will come with. So we are not going to specify how many rows we want. And the rows that get created automatically for us. And that's why we're saying that any rows that get created automatically, we want them to be 487 pixels. We could have specified that value with grid template rows, but then how many rows are we going to specify? If we say 1, well, that's only going to happen for the first one. Then we have to specify, well, 2. Well, no, we don't know how many rows we're going to have, so we just say auto rows. And that's all for that. The last interesting piece is to use useEffect again to fetch not all of the images or the products, but just one, the one for the details. We have access to the ID of this product. So we want the ability to fetch only that product that is going to be showing on this page. How's this feeling so far, guys? Leave me a comment, let me know, communicate with me so that I can address the things that are more important for you in these videos. Now let's just go to item details. And actually the first thing that I'm going to do is go to shop.js, because I want to copy the API function, the fetch. So here we can remember from shop.js that when the component renders, we want to make an API call only once with useEffect. I will go to shop.js and I will copy all the useEffect hook, go back to item details and paste it right here. Now, of course, we have to import the useEffect hook from React first. So useEffect. And then this set products is a function that we don't have. So I'm gonna comment that. And lastly, here in the API call, we are calling for photos and we're calling for all of them. So I am gonna first remove the limit. We are not gonna say that we only want 10. We are gonna say that we want photos / and we are gonna specify an ID for the photo or the product ID. Of course, now that I am saying that this is gonna be an ID in JavaScript, we need to make this a templating string. Templating string, we go to the end, templating string. And of course, it's giving us a warning because this ID doesn't exist yet. But we know that it is coming from match. We are using it down here, match params item ID. So actually that's how we should call it. We can say here match.params.id. And like we were saying previously, these hooks are either running all the time if we remove the dependencies array, or only one time if we don't have the dependencies but we do have the array. And finally, we can specify dependencies. In this case, we need to specify the ID that we are using. So we would say ID here. Now I already made 2 mistakes here, and hopefully someone already spotted this. But so I said that it's not called ID, it's called item ID. That's number 1. And second, I am passing ID as one of the dependencies, but where is this ID coming from? So let me clean this a little bit, give some space and say const, and I'm gonna destructor item ID from match.params. That way I can pass the item ID as the dependency and then remove match.params here. And I can also reuse that down here. Let's go to the console, see what's going on. And we are fetching one object that is ID 1. That's the one that we have here. Let's go back and try number 2. And sure enough, here we have it, ID number 2. Now that we have access to that item, we can do something very similar as before. We are going to have to update the state when we receive it. So we are going to destructure item and set item from useState. It auto imported useState in case you didn't notice that. It already is here. If you're following along, make sure that you import that if it didn't. And then instead of set products, we can say set item. I could have also called this product and set product, but it is confusing enough already. So let's just say set item, and we can remove the console log from here. And similar case as before, when this component renders for the first time, the API has not returned any data. So if we try to render the item is going to be undefined. Let's actually also take care of that. So right now it would be undefined. We want it to be null as the initial state. And then when the API call returns the information and we set it, it will have the item and it won't be null anymore. Let's say const render loading like before. And if there is no item, then we will render a div that says loading, and we close that div. Now instead of rendering a React fragment, we can render a div and close that div, and we can move the IAM details to after the link and change it just a little bit to say item details ID. This is just for us. It is not really part of the design. I don't have a design for this page. And let's wrap this text in a P, another paragraph, and we will be closing that paragraph. And after that, our image that now we have access to. So image, which is a self-closing tag. We know that to have an image, we need a source of where this image is coming from. And in this case, it is coming from item.url. We know that property exists already. And the other warning that we get is for the alt. We remember that as well. Image elements must have an alt prop. So let's add alt with the item title. And of course, we created this render loading, but we didn't use it. So let's just do that. We will return render loading or the div with the contents. Let's go to the shop, then to one of the item details, so learn more. And we have an interesting warning. Functions are not valid as React child. And well, of course, we passed the render loading as a function. It is a function, but we didn't run it. So we have to run that in order to get either not item, that we don't get that, we just would get false, or if true, we would get the div, which would be valid JSX. Now we can see our image. Let's try that again. I'm gonna go back to shop. I'm gonna go to the second image This one is purple. Gonna go back. Let's try this one. And there we have it. It's working perfectly. To add a little style to this and do it in a different way so that we can learn something slightly different, we're gonna pass the style, but we're gonna do it inline. We can do it like this. We say style as a property or JSX attribute. And to that property, we're gonna pass an object. It will be 2 curly braces. And to this link, I wanna do what we did to the other one. I just wanna say text decoration to be equals to none. And I want to have the same color as we have in the other page, which I have handy. So I'm just gonna copy and paste it from this other window. And we can do the same thing to the paragraph as we did in the previous one. Style, again, as a property, but we will pass an object and we will say margin dot 5 rems. And there we have it. Although the paragraph doesn't seem to have the margin, and it's because I said margin, and it's not margin, it's margin. And now it has a margin. The last thing that I want to fix for you guys before we go is we would expect that when we are landing to one of these pages, example here, if I go back to shop, I would expect shop to be underlined. If I go to home, it is underlined. If I go to shop, it's underlined. But if I refresh the page, it goes to home, but we're not at home. We are at the shop. And to fix that, we're gonna use one last hook from React Router DOM, and that is useLocation. So let's quickly go back to the code. And the code for the navbar is in the navbar.js file. And let's take a quick look at the logic that we have. We start this file saying that the default state for our navbar is at 0. So whenever the navbar renders, it always goes to the first item. 0 is going to be the selected item. If the selected item is 0, it selects home, and then 1 is shop, and so on. So that's why home is always selected when we re-render the page. Like I mentioned before, the way we are gonna fix this is with a hook, with the useLocation hook from React Router DOM. I'm gonna go all the way to the top of this file, and I'm gonna add space at the very top of this component, and I will bring the hook useLocation. Let's auto import that. And now we are bringing useLocation from React Router DOM. Now we can run this hook and we are gonna receive an object from it. So let's go to the application, and down here in the console we can see that location object. Don't mind all of this warnings and error because they are happening when we are editing Codesandbox. If I clear the console out and I re-render one of the pages, we just get the location object. If I expand the object, we can see the properties. We have hash key, path name, search, and state. And the property that we're interested in is path name. We can see that path name is /shop. If I go to blog, then our path name becomes /blog. Since that is the property that we are interested in, now instead of calling this location, I am gonna destructure the object and I am gonna just grab from that object path name. And now I can remove the console log. And now because I have path name, this makes things so much easier for us. I'm gonna go to our nav item, our first one, and instead of saying selected item equals 0, I am gonna say that if the path name equals /, then that means that we are at home. And I will copy this part of the logic and I'm gonna paste it down here. So again, instead of selected item equals 1, I'm gonna say that if path name equals /shop, we are at shop. And I will do the same for the last one. I will say that selected item equals 2 is not the case. We want path name equals to blog. Then we're at blog. And we are very close to done with this. But besides having this is selected property in all of them, Depending on the path name, we also have the click handlers. If I click on one of the nav items, it's gonna send shop, but also the number that we had before for the index of the item. So we don't need that anymore. And if I go up to our useState, we had 0 and we were using that selected item that we can see with this red line that it is not being used anymore. And we were setting the selected item when we click with handle click. So first thing we want to do is remove the line 9, the useState, because we're not going to be using that anymore. And since we don't have that anymore, we cannot set the selected item. I will remove that as well. And now, because of that, this function accepts index and path, but we only need path. So I'm going to remove the index. And finally, we need to clean the function calls below. I will remove the 0 here, the 1 right here, and the 2 right here. So now when we handle click, we just send the path name, and the path name. And that way, at the beginning, we know which path name we have because of the useLocation hook. And when we handle click, we push to the history object the new path, which will go through the routes and re-render this component. If I go to the application, right now we are at blog, that's fine. If I go to shop, that works as well. If I refresh the page being on shop, we see that shop is again selected. Now it is not home, so our problem has been corrected. And if I go to home, home is also selected. Let me refresh the page just to make sure that that's also working. And yes, home is still selected. And that would be all for this series, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this process. If you did, don't forget to give a like to this video. Consider subscribing. Thank you for watching and see you next time.